Hi, everyone. Welcome to Classics You Slept Through. This is the book podcast where we read and discuss classic books. I'm your host, Kyle Davis, along with a girl who makes scrambled eggs pretty well, I'm assuming. My sister, Mare. How's your scrambled eggs, Mare?
They're actually decent. Your kids told me they're the best scrambled eggs they'd ever had when
Really?
they were here.
Well, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. My wife says I dry them out too much.
That's what they told me. Mine weren't dry. So
okay. Well, excellent. I try to keep them moist. You know, you want to. I don't pre-mix the egg. I crack the eggs right into the pan and then.
Oh, that's a mistake.
Mix them right there. No, you're supposed to mix them right there in the pan, as opposed to whipping them before you putting them in.
I disagree.
Oh, no. Okay. All right.
Which one of us makes the best scrambled eggs your kids have ever eaten? It's me.
Okay. All right. So. Touche. Well, we'll see how our boys on the river here, how they do, because we have a little bit of cooking today. So today we're talking about Three Men in a Boat, To Say Nothing of the Dog, novel by Jerome K. Jerome. Humorous travelogue of these three young gentlemen of means, apparently, taking a little boat trip down the Thames. And thus far, our hero, our narrator, Jerome, and his friend Harris, have made it as far as getting to the river and getting into the boat. I suppose it's Saturday morning because their buddy George is working at the bank, or working. Mm-hmm. They don't think much of his work ethic. And in these chapters, as we've discussed in the past, a lot of the humor from this travelogue comes from reminiscences and stories and asides that Jerome brings up, sort of slice of life, little observational humor of traveling down the river. And we can kind of sum up the plot of these 4 chapters, this little section of the book, as George joins in, we go down the river a little bit, we camp out for a night, we have some breakfast, and we have some lunch. And that's kind of what happens on our journey. We go through some locks, we meet a few other people on the river, but, by and large, as we've discussed, this book is about the other stuff, not so much the river journey.
Yeah, the river journey is relatively uneventful, except for the fact that it reminds him of all of these asides.
Right. As I suppose a restful vacation float down the Thames should be. It should be rather uneventful, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the point.
It's a vacation. It's not like a excursion. Although, I don't know. Anyway, exactly.
Yeah, so we'll see. All right, so we're kicking off here with Chapter 9. Right at the end of Chapter 8, we met up with George, and he has Chekhov's banjo with him. We'll see if this banjo goes off later in the book. He says, it's easy. I've got the instruction manual right here. Never played banjo before.
But that's a funny thing about the end of Chapter 8 going into 9. 9 has no banjo playing.
None of these chapters have any banjo playing. So,
and yet, we have a banjo on board.
We do. All right, so George gets in, and immediately they're like, you know what? We're going to put George to work. George, why don't you try towing the boat for a little bit? We haven't really discussed, so we get a little more context. It's never explicitly told to the reader how this boat operates, because I guess if you are a person in the late 1800s, it's common knowledge how a boat operates, right? Like we don't read novels of nowadays of people getting into a car and explicitly turning the key into the ignition and stepping on the gas. We all know how cars operate.
Mm-hmm.
So piecing together how this boat works, right? Apparently there's a tow line. So a lot of the locomotion of the boat comes from someone on the tow path with a line hooked to the boat, marching along, dragging the boat behind them, right?
Through the lock, right? Mostly.
Well, I think just in general. Yeah, just in general. You also have a person in the boat steering the boat, because we have lines. So apparently there's some sort of rope contraption. It's not a tiller moving the rudder, but apparently like some lines, because we get mentioned later of Jerome being on the lines and steering. There's also, I guess, if the wind kicks up, they have the ability to put up a mast and a sail, and then have the wind push
Right.
So that's just kind of basics of how this boat works. So anyway, I guess the wind is down right now. So they're like, hey, George, we've been towing for the last day or morning or whatever. Why don't you get out? It's your turn to tow for a bit. And George immediately is like, oh, I think I really should make some tea, because making tea is hard work. I don't want to take
really hard.
I need to take the load off of you guys. And they're like, hit the bricks, buddy. You're towing. And so this gets us into our first side, and we get to talk about tow lines. So we get a couple pages discussing tangled toe lines and how a tow line it always be, no matter how carefully you wind it up when you put it away, whenever you go to get it out again, it's always this tangled rat's nest, bird's nest of rope, and you can't get it out. And, the guy that gets it out always gets angry at the guy who puts it away and blames them. And,
I was just thinking earbuds.
I was going to say that's probably the main modern example that people can relate to. Although nowadays, a lot of people have Bluetooth headphones or Bluetooth earbuds, and so we don't really have those cords so much anymore. Although you are wearing,
this went. If you see it, it went through the washer and the dryer, and was the tightest little ball of rolled up earbud cord, and I disentangled it, and it works perfectly. But it looks like this. And I just kept thinking of exactly what there's a picture of Montmorency all wrapped up. And that's exactly what my earbud cords look like 2 days ago.
Well, there you go.
But whatever brand this is, washer, dryer, works great.
Works fine. All right. So it got me thinking about, I used to have I used to wear, I have a pair of AirPods now, so I don't have cords anymore. But, years ago when I did have cords attached to an iPod, mid 2000s technology, there's a great way. This is very outdated, but I still get to use it every once in a while, right? Do you know what the best way to avoid that tangle is? The best life hack that you can use for those things.
No,
I'll share it with you since you need this, apparently, right?
Apparently.
So what you do is you Spider-Man it, right? Or I love you if you're sign language, right? So you take the earpieces, put them in the palm of your hand, and put your middle two fingers over them, right? Mm-hmm. So you got the horns there, and then do figure 8 around your fingers with the cord, and at the end you kind of wrap it and tuck it, and you'll never get it tangled again.
I feel like Jerome would disagree with you, but that would tangle a tow line, and it probably would tangle my earbuds. I'm going to try it though.
It works with corded earpods. I will guarantee that. I used it for many years until I upgraded to cordless. Although, do you know what the other casualty of going to cordless is?
Losing the whole thing?
I suppose you could. Yeah, that's definitely a fear. But you can no longer do FM radio on your phone because you need the wired cord to be the antenna for your phone to get FM radio.
So many elderly gentlemen are so upset about not being able to get FM radio on their cell phone.
Exactly. Not a feature I use frequently, but, anyway. So then we get into some more stories about tow lines and about people not noticing their boat drifting off once the tow line slips the boat, and they just keep walking.
Where is Auntie?
Where is she? We get some
lost their auntie.
Yes. Then we get a slew of towing stories. We get the story of the men who tow too quickly because they're talking, and the guy in the boat loses his hat, and he's yelling at them, "Hey, slow down, slow down!" And they ignore him and keep towing too quickly. We get the story of, which you just alluded to, the couple who are just walking along and there's no boat, and Auntie has floated off somewhere, and they have no idea.
It's a great picture of her waving in the background.
Yes.
She's got her umbrella. She's like, "Hello, I'm adrift."
We get the story of the boar and a horse towing. So a kid, I guess for efficiency, decided to hitch up to a horse. And this is where we get sort of that steering, right? So the kid on the horse is pulling the boat, which pulls it at a faster rate than a human walking. And the guy steering, and this is so Jerome kind of, this is sort of contemporaneous because he sees this guy and he's like, "Oh, I hope he pulls the wrong line." because we find out Jerome does not like horses towing because they go too fast. So he says, oh, I hope this guy pulls the wrong line. And lo and behold, the guy pulls the wrong line, runs the boat aground. Him and his friends get all tumbled out of the boat. And the boy, I'm assuming out of spite, hits the horse to a gallop and takes off. And they've lost their prime mover for the boat. And so then Jerome kind of gets into his personal beef with horses, that they tow the boats too quickly, and then the tow lines go over your boat and get tangled, and everything gets kind of messed up on the river there. And he doesn't like that. And then we get the nice long story of those girls when girls tow a boat. Man, girls.
It's the best one of all.
Girls.
It's the best one of all. It'd be chatting. Then it got a little weird to talk about how they get it's all wound up along their legs and they're hitching up their skirts. And I was like, where is this going? And they have to get down and untangle each other, and they're breathless. And I'm like, what? Jerome.
I think given this story and the previous one of girls in their Sunday dress going out picnicking and having to wash up, I think there's a little bit of like, this is as racy as it gets in the late 1800s.
He did say in the like chapter or section description, being towed by girls, exciting sensation.
Oh, very true.
What?
Yeah.
Is it? And then when the description came, I was like, oh, I see.
That's why it's so exciting. We get a little ankle there when they're untangling themselves. But girls are very silly. They want their scarf, and they don't want their scarf. They need something else out of the boat, and they're combing their hair while they should be towing. And oh, they're so silly, those girls.
Then they see a cow, and you have to leave the boat to chivvy the cow out of their way. They don't just see a cow. There's a cow in the way.
Right.
Like, there's a difference. When I first read it, I was like, they see a cow, and so they were distracted? Like,
the girls don't want to get the cow out of the way. Ooh, yuck. Ask the boys to do that. Goodness.
When I was in Ireland, we had to get out of, the driver got out of our bus and had to get the cow out of the road.
Oh, very nice.
And I think was it just one? I think it might have been just one. But yeah, I took students over to Ireland for like spring preview, where they get a preview of what it would be like to study abroad. And the cow blocked the way. So I feel like this is something that happens in the rural.
Oh, definitely.
Wherever we are. Rural roads along the Thames.
Exactly, yeah. We would get sheep and goats in Jordan. That was our big flocks of sheep would cross the road, and you're have to wait for them to go. And then we get the final story in this section about locks and pushing on, and you're towing. So he relates a story of when him and a cousin were towing one time, and it was getting late. They wanted to rest for the night. He said, oh, the next lock is only half mile up. We can push on to there. And they keep going and going and going. And eventually, it's getting later and later, and they're more tired. And then eventually they pass a boat, and they say, hey, where's such and such lock? And they say, oh, that was taken out a year ago, man. What are you talking about? And they realize.
He went on and on about his map. He's like, such a good map. It's right there on the map. It's a great map.
And apparently the map was wrong. And so then they just decided to keep on going anyway, because they've already gone. And they get home anyway for dinner. And
I feel like
that's the end of
him and his cousin were on a date. I think they were on a date. I think it was like the thing that they did back then. Like, it was a cousin date.
Oh. I don't know.
I also looked up.
I think him specifying it was his cousin, though.
I don't think that was a worry.
You don't think? Hang on, I gotta shut the door real quick. There we go. I've got cars out there, so I'm just gonna put a snap in here so I can check for that section. Okay.
And then they find they hear the music in the boat, and he calls them a party of provincial Aries and Ariettes. Aries and Ariettes.
Aries and Ariettes.
So
They're Aries.
I didn't know what that was, and I was super worried it was like racist or something. Or I don't know.
Cockney accent. They're like, come on. They don't pronounce their H's.
But I think it's Harrys and Harriets, like every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Just a bunch of people, like.
But they got an accent, so they're,
Yeah. The working class folks.
The poors.
The pores. Then the picture of the boat that these people are in, they're like shoved into a canoe. There's like 10 of them shoved into a canoe with their accordion. And they're making fun of them. Blow me tight if there ain't a gentleman but looking for Wallingford Lock, Bill.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, here's this rich feller. Oh, I think he's so smart, man. Wallingford's been gone for a year, pal. Hit the bricks.
Look at this, Bill. I love it.
It's great. And again, you know, Bill as the working man's name. You know, shout out to Alice in Wonderland and our friend Bill. Right? Yeah.
Two times I thought of Alice in Wonderland while reading this.
Oh, okay.
I thought of Bill, and then that same section where they can't find the lock, and he's like, suddenly I thought maybe I was dreaming, and she thought she was dreaming, and then we got into a conversation about which one was dreaming and which one was part of the dream, and then that's when they heard the music. And then I thought that part was great when they hear the music, that it was bad. It was bad, poorly done music, because had it been like really well done, beautiful music, it would have played into the fact that they thought they were maybe dying. Or about it would have been like angelic music. So they were very reassured by the Aries and Ariettes music.
Yeah, now it's just body drinking songs. They're not dead yet.
Exactly. It sounded singularly human, he said. I was like, I like that. Absolutely.
All right, so then we get into chapter 10, and now they want to go to sleep. And so now we get a little bit more description of the boat. They are going to prep it. They're going to camp out on the boat tonight. So in order to do so, they're going to throw a canvas over the boat, kind of make it into a tent. But first, they have to assemble these metal hoops. They're going to go into holders on the side of the boat, I suppose, and they'll stretch the canvas over, and then they'll have some protection from the elements that evening. And, they just, again, like everything these guys do, they can't get it right. They put the wrong hoop in the wrong slot, and it gets stuck. They can't get the canvas out. And Jay's job, apparently, was to hang out on one side of the boat, wait for them to throw the canvas over, and then he'd lash it down tight or whatever. And, of course, he's just sitting there while they're goofing off. 10-minute operation that's taking over a half hour at this point. And they chide him for not helping, and he gets, at some point, it takes them forever, but they eventually do get the canvas up. And they're
him and Montmorency. That's all we hear about Montmorency. He's just sitting there waiting.
He just is.
For the canvas.
That's because we're going to say nothing of the dog. He's just sort of
there. They really aren't saying anything.
He doesn't really do anything. He just, say nothing of the dog. I mean, he is there, technically. So they get the canvas up, and then they're ready for dinner, and they want some tea. So then we get into, this is where, hey, we say a watched pot never boils for a reason. And so we get a very long description of, if you want tea, the pot's never going to boil. So you have to trick the pot by saying, I don't want any tea tonight, do you? Nah, me neither. And that'll
get close to the pot and you say it.
Yeah.
No, I don't like tea. I think I'll have lemonade.
And eventually the pot will boil. Yeah. And the pot boils. So then they get they eat a big dinner. And we get a little discussion about, foods that encourage us to do different things. Like, you get good bacon in the morning. That one gets you going and wants you to go. But then we get into, like, the contentedness of fullness. I really appreciated this. Like, all of a sudden, all of this griping and bickering that these guys have been doing on the river, they had a good dinner. They're full. And all of a sudden, they're extremely polite to one another. Harris steps on George's foot, and he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it, old man. It's just fine. It happens sometimes." And they're all just very happy at this point.
It's like with kids, it's like you're acting like such a jerk, and then suddenly I go, "Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Something is wrong with you that you're acting this way. You're real hangry right now." And then you feed them, and they're angels again.
They're wonderful.
Or they're better.
Yeah, at least a little bit.
It's like a life hack. Feed your kid if they're being a jerk, and then see what happens.
Exactly. Or your wife. It works with the wife too. If you're like, why don't you go get something to eat, honey? Just go, yeah. And then that usually fixes her as well.
Yeah, me too.
I can always. I come home from work, and if something's off, I'm like, it's 2:30. You haven't had lunch, have you? No, we haven't had lunch yet. All right, why don't you take a minute?
Yeah. You better watch how you say that, though. Have you eaten?
So then we get into So we start talking about inns and beds, and we get a story about George's dad. One time he went to an inn, him and his buddy, and there was only one bed, so they were like, or there was two beds, right? But it was so dark.
Yeah, but they were drunk.
They were drunk, and they didn't know which. They both got in the same bed, and then both of them were like, "Hey, there's somebody in my bed," and they throw each other out, and then they're like, "Hey, there was somebody in my bed too," and they kind of don't know that it's each other. It's kind of sweet and heartwarming. And then we get to the end of the story, and Harris goes, "Hey, what inn was that? Because that happened to my dad too." Like,
I think that's sweet. Harris's and George's dad, like, might have been friends too. How would they not know that?
Exactly. I would think. I mean, I would assume they all run in the same social circles. Probably they would.
What's better though is if the same story did happen to two separate people. To think that 4 people had that experience versus it's their dads.
Well, as we'll get into a little later in, I think, 12, this sharing of the beds at inns from random people is quite common, apparently. Even amongst these upper class folk, right? Like George, Harry, and Jerome are at least middle class plus men of means. And they're still sharing beds at inns.
It's odd we've done away with that. I can't imagine why culturally we've done away with such a thing. I mean, I get it, hostels, like sharing the room.
Sure.
But I don't think you literally have to share a bed in a hostel, at least not against your will.
I don't think so, no. I mean, like I said, we'll get into that here down in 12. But, so then they finally go to sleep in the boat, and it's pretty uncomfortable. It's, something's always jamming Jerome in the back, and he's just kind of upset. But this wakes him up in the middle of the night, and he gets to wonder at the still of the night and contemplate the cosmos. And then we get this very odd, it's our first sort of very strange departure, right? So he ends up telling this story about these 3 knights that are going through a forest. It's a very dark forest, and they lose one of their comrades. And they're very sorry, and they feel that he died. And so they push on to the castle they were going to, and they spend some time there feasting and reveling and whatnot. And then their friend ends up showing up a few days later, and they just sort of they end the chapter with the forest was named Sorrow, and he had been going through it. So this was quite a different. What do you think this story meant? Why he threw this in here?
Well, first of all, I loved it, but I think he did it to connect the idea that he was wondering at the night. They've been through this hardship of going down the Thames, and he's trying to sleep, and he's got this thing in his back, and then he gets up and he has the perspective or ability to wonder at the night. And he said something to the effect of, if you haven't been through something, you don't appreciate the night or the stars. If you have, kind of like if you haven't experienced sadness, then what is happiness to you? Right? You have to, one makes the other more real, or you appreciate it more. And I think he was trying to illustrate that truth with this story, because, the knight who goes through the forest called Sorrow then sees this vision, this wonderful thing that got him through the sorrow. And you don't know what that is. So he said the dark forest was sorrow, but the vision that good knight saw therein, we may not speak nor tell, because unless you go through it, you can't see it yourself, I think. So you have to go through something terrible to see the way out, or something wonderful. You can't think your way through sorrow or depression or hardship. You have to actually go through it, and you come out the other end, and you can tell people about it, but they'll never understand it until they go through the forest or the sorrow themselves. I think that's what he's trying to illustrate here. Also, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah. It definitely was a change of tone from the other stories.
For sure.
So far in the book. It's definitely more poetic and introspective than the other, sort of humorous things that he's stuck in here.
Maybe he's trying to flex his writing muscles and be I can write something funny, but it's not just like it's not just surface level. There's more to me, and as a writer and as a person, and I can do both. Maybe.
Yeah. I think you're right, and he kind of continues that theme a little bit here coming up in the next chapter. So now we get into chapter 11. Again, not too much in chapter 11 here. So we start off with George waking up early, and he tells a story about this one time that George got up early, where basically George forgot to wind his watch the night before bed, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and looks at his watch. He's like, oh, what time is it? And his watch is stopped at 8:15, and he freaks out because he has to be in the city by 9. So he leaps up, tosses his watch, and runs into the bathroom. He shaves and dresses and washes, and he uses cold water because he doesn't have time for hot water. And he comes back out and he grabs his watch, and apparently when he threw it, it kind of kick-started whatever wind was left in the watch. And he looks, and it's 9:15 now, and he's like, oh, I gotta go. And he races downstairs, and the door's still locked, and the lights are off, and there's no breakfast, and he curses Mrs. G for not getting a second Mrs. G, different Mrs. G, by the way. A lot of Mrs. G's are landladies in this. He curses his Mrs. G for not opening the door and whatever, and he races out, and he's running down the street, and he sprints, and he finally gets to, I guess, the bus stop or whatever, and he looks at his watch, it's 9:05, and, he notices, oh, nobody's awake yet. I know it's foggy, I know it's dark, but it's no excuse. People should be up, and shops should be open. And he sees a cop and a street sweeper and whatnot, and they're kind of like looking at him, and he asks the cop, he's like, well, what time is it? He's like, oh, hang on a sec, you'll hear the church bell, and the clock tower or whatever rings 3. And he goes, well, it only rang 3 times. The cop says, well, what time do you think it should be? He's like, it should be 9. The guy's like, all right, buddy, why don't you go on back to bed?
Do you know? Yeah.
So then we get into, man, the world just doesn't change, right? So now George slinks home. He's got cops following him. He's got a couple of guys stationed outside his house. He can't sleep. He plays some chess. He gets up. He's like, you know what? I'm going to go for a walk. So he goes out and he goes for a walk, but now the cops are onto him. They're following him. And so this makes him feel like he's... Exactly. This makes him feel like he's done something. So he starts trying to avoid the cops. He's slinking around. He's hiding in doorways. This makes them more suspicious. Anyway, it just gets bad, right? And he doesn't want to wake up Mrs. G to get breakfast because she'll freak out. And he doesn't want to make any noise. He's trying to be really quiet in the morning. It's still the morning. And this one, man, did this one get me thinking about, like, it just never changes, does it? Like, you can't, like, cops harass everybody. Apologies to any cops listening, all right? But you know what? You guys have a reputation for a reason. But it's like, when you go outside of your house at 2 a.m, that's not illegal, right? Like, there's no curfew. It is strange. But there's no curfew. You're not breaking a law by walking. Like, George was not breaking any laws, and yet he was treated as though he were and held in such suspicion. And it just makes me think, like, we have, we as a society, I'm going to get a little deep here, right? Like, we have acquiesced and we have de facto restrictions upon us which don't actually exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you want to walk around your neighborhood at 2 a.m, you should be 100% within your legal right to do so. There is no curfew. There is no law that says you can't walk around the neighborhood at 2 a.m. But if you do that, you're going to get trailed by the cops, and they're going to get in your face, and they're going to be like, hey, buddy, what are you doing out at 2 a.m.? Well, what do you care what I'm doing out at 2 a.m.? Am I breaking a law? Am I allowed to be out at 2 a.m.?
Well, you're probably about to, or you just did, because why else would you be out here, right?
Right.
That's the thought.
That's the thought. Now you're getting into preemptive, like, I haven't done anything wrong, but you're harassing me as though I have.
And then anyway, the act of, like, being treated as if you have then makes you act in such a way
exactly
that then further convinces the people watching you, like the act of observing something changes the thing that is being observed.
Like, I don't want this cop following me, so I'm going to turn down a street maybe I wasn't going to just to get away from him. Now he's like, why is that guy going down that street? oh, he's definitely trying to shake me. He's definitely up to something now. And you're like, no, I just don't want a cop following me. You know, like you make me uncomfortable. Yeah,
Well,
so I don't know. I just got thinking about that, and anyway.
And the idea that if you are out then and something happens to you, well, that's your fault. You shouldn't have been out.
You shouldn't have been out. But why not? We say all the time, right? It's a free country, right? Is there a law that says I can't be out on the street at 2 a.m.? And if there were a law that said I couldn't be out on, wouldn't we protest that and say that is
Of course.
unjust restriction of my liberty?
Of course. But only hoodlums and harlots go out after 9.
Exactly.
It is really delightful, though, to walk around my neighborhood at night in the dark. And I only do it if I'm super angry. So I get my energy out because I don't take a leisurely walk for no reason, but maybe I should. I remember doing it one snowy night and it was wonderful. It was laid out. Nobody was there. And also, like, not having a dog right now, I don't have cause to just wander. I go for walks every now and then when I need it, but like the act of a daily walk is something that I should just do.
Definitely.
But at night, it's particularly wonderful. Sometimes if you hit it at the right time, you can smell everyone cooking dinner in the evening or breakfast in the morning.
Yeah.
It's just really delightful. But nighttime is I really like it.
Yeah. It's the still of the night. It's kind of like what we talked about in chapter 10 when he's laying in the boat, just sort of looking at the stars. Like it's calm and it's peaceful. It's actually really nice.
Yeah, it feels.
I recommend it.
The other day,
I get harassed by cops.
The other day, I took a walk, just me, just around the circle of like my particular neighborhood, and it's quick, and I just needed it. And I left, and I went outside, and I looked up towards the trees and the sky, and it felt like a similar version of like, oh, I'm super thirsty, I had to get a drink of water. That's what it felt like for my eyes, because I've been at the computer all day looking at my parts of my house I see all the time, and just being at a screen, and then to go outside and look at the trees and the sky, I just felt like, oh God, that feels good.
Yeah.
Like it was an incredible feeling. I needed it bad that day. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are on to something. Like you need outdoor time. Like you need fresh air.
Yes.
You need to be outside. I love this time of year because it's cool enough that we open the windows and you get that fresh breeze coming through, and it chills the house, and it's wonderful. I like it.
I learned on NPR that it's really healthy for you too, because you let in healthy, necessary microbes into the air and into your life. And in our days of, the guy called it the theater of keeping COVID at bay, like washing your hands and constantly cleaning everything, even though that's maybe not necessary. But you're washing away good microbes, and the way microbes actually change. So like a baker's hands their microbes have actually changed from the daily use of yeast and bread and that kind of thing. And it's literally plays into why like a baker's bread might taste way better than a novice's bread, because of the actual microbes on their hands and stuff.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, wow.
Super weird. It was really interesting.
That's fun.
It was some, microbiologist or something with a book out being interviewed on NPR, but
sure, yeah.
It was cool. But he said, open your windows and that will keep you healthier.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. All right, then we get into a quick story about, the night before, they'd all said, hey, let's jump in the river in the morning. It'll be fun. And then when they actually woke up, they're like, it's really cold.
Really cold.
I don't know if I want to do this. So even Jerome was like, you know what? I'm not going to swim either, but I'm going to splash some water on my face. That'll feel good. So he gets out, goes to the bank. He crawls out onto a tree limb to get some water. Tree limb gives way. He falls in the water anyway. Now he's splashing around. He's calling the guys, come on, get in the water. And they don't want to. Well, he had gone to get dressed and taken his shirt with him, but in the act of doing this, he realized, oh, wait a minute, this is George's shirt floating around in the water. And so they're all laughing at him, and he's angry, but once he realizes it's George's shirt, he kind of starts laughing too. And he says, George is like, well, what are you laughing about? And he's like, it's your shirt, buddy.
Your shirt.
Yeah, and then George is not so happy. Next story we get, Harris wants to make some scrambled eggs, and he says, these are the best scrambled eggs. Like, people that have eaten my scrambled eggs, they never want to eat anything again, and they will die if they don't taste my scrambled eggs again.
Harris is the butt of like every joke. I'm noticing.
He pretty much is, yeah. So then
Do
we
they
get
even
into...
like him?
He's sort of the disagreeable one, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because George is kind of like the goofball, and Harris is kind of like the...
Like George and Jerome are the actual friends, and then Harris is like the third one that they have.
He's the guy that goes to the bar all the time. He's the one that's always drinking. So he's kind of like the disagreeable feller. So anyway, we get into, he's trying to make the eggs. He gets it all over himself, and yada yada, and they get to the end of it, and there's just a mass of burnt nothingness. And there's like, this is kind of gross. And Harris is like, well, it's because we don't have the right equipment. So next time we have a chance to get some of the stuff I need, well, then I'll make some real scrambled eggs. Like, okay, all right.
Yeah, but it was interesting. Passing the blame.
Yeah, but it was interesting. They said that apparently George and Jerome were unfamiliar with scrambled eggs. Like this was some exotic dish to them. As opposed to like some of the most basic thing, like the first thing you teach a child to cook sort of thing.
Huh.
Yeah.
Did you Google when scrambled eggs were invented?
I did not. I neglected to research when scrambled eggs came to England as a dish. But yeah, that's the impression I got from the story, is that they were unfamiliar with scrambled eggs.
Huh.
It was very strange. Then we close out chapter 11. So they sort of mentioned it, I think, in 9, that one of their goals, sort of destination they're trying to hit, is Magna Carta Island, which apparently, I guess if you're English, you automatically know that this is where the Magna Carta was signed, right? So then we get into a very long passage, and this is sort of like the end of 10, right? It's sort of doesn't fit with the rest of the book. And in the, I don't even know what those are called, the little preview things at the beginning of the chapter. There's probably a literary term for them.
Chapter previews?
Yeah,
section
we need
previews? Titles?
Section titles. We need to look up what the actual... If someone knows what the literary term for that is, send us an email. But we get in... He says he includes it for use by teachers with students. But he basically writes this long... It's sort of historical fiction, obviously, because he's imagining what the soldiers and what the townsfolk and whatnot felt as King John is coming down to, and of course, I'm only picturing like the scrawny lion from Disney's Robin Hood, King John, that is always sucking on his thumb, and the crown doesn't fit on his head. That's what I'm picturing. But him coming down to, get bullied and pressured into signing the Magna Carta by all the rebellious lords of England. Anyway, it was interesting, I suppose. But
did it feel out of place?
It felt out of place, I think.
Yeah.
But it was, again, it was interesting. He's throwing in. He threw in a little bit earlier in the book, a couple chapters ago. This sort of history of England along the Thames as he's going. So I guess he's educating as well as entertaining throughout this. And he does a little bit as we get into chapter 12 here. He sort of continues the theme a little bit because we talk about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And he segues into them because I guess we're going to areas where they frequented. And he discusses, what's like when you are in a house with people who are courting. And it's super annoying because every room you go into, they're like squirreled away, and then you leave, and then you're trying to go somewhere else, and you just want to have a nice day, and you're always catching them in the act of whatever they're doing. And, he finally concludes with, there should be a special room where people just go to, and I think that's called motels, Jerome.
Get a room.
Get a room, man. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, he compares this to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and it was just kind of funny that, they're like making out in a back alley, and Anne Boleyn's like, oh, Mr. Henry VIII was just walking along and ran into him, and we're going the same direction, man. Sort of that. So it's very, thinking back to, Northanger Abbey and some of these other books that we've read, the dynamic.
Scandalous just to be seen in a carriage.
Exactly.
Going around in a carriage in the open air where everyone can see you.
Right, with no chaperone. So then they pass the town of Datchet, I guess is how you say it. I'm not sure. And they reminisce about the last time the three of them did this. So this is not the first boat trip these three cats have taken together. So you would think they'd be better at it, I suppose. But the last time they did this, they tried to find a hotel in Datchet. They were like, "Hey, do you remember the last time we were here?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember." And so they go to the first hotel, and Jerome says, "There's no honeysuckle on the side of the hotel. I don't like it. Let's go to the next one." And so they go to the next one, and Harris says, "See that guy hanging out on the porch? I don't like his boots. He's got red hair. I'm not staying there." And
obviously seedy.
You see, yeah. So they keep walking, and they go for a ways, and there's no hotels. And so they stop somebody and say, "Hey, where's the hotels around here?" And they're like, "Oh, man, you passed them. They're back a ways." And he's like, "Oh, well, we didn't like those two for these arbitrary reasons." And George gets angry and says, "Well, why don't you two just build a hotel? I'm going back to the one we passed, you know." But everything's full. And this is where we get into, apparently back then, you just threw people in beds, because they mention, I think the guy had like 3 beds or something. And he's like, "I've already got 6 single people and 2 married couples in these beds." And I'm just like, what? So, like, if you're a married couple, you're just sharing a bed with 2 randos? Like, that's just kind of bizarre.
It might be their thing, though, and they didn't know it was their thing until out of necessity. Sounds very French, though.
It does. It very much does. And, I mean, they've got, they suggest, well, what about the billiard room? What about the stable? What about, they've got people sleeping on the billiard table. We've got people in the tap room. We've got, people are just everywhere. And I'm just wondering, A, did people, like, put up with this? Like, they paid full price to sleep on a billiard table? And B, like, why didn't market pressures force someone else to open an inn? I mean, apparently it's a popular place.
There's clearly no, like, fire code at this point.
No.
You can't cover every inch of your inn with people who need a place to stay.
Right. And so they walk. So they go a distance away from the inn, and then they find out, oh, well, there's a lady that rents a room, and where is it? Oh, it's right next to the inn. So they have to walk another mile back, and they're sort of ping-ponging, and they find somebody else. This old lady's like, "Oh, I'll take you to my place. I know if my friend rents a room." And she tells them all, it's a 20-minute walk there. And, it's getting very late at night. And, of course, that's full. And this other place is full. They just keep getting ping-ponged around to everywhere's full. Until finally, Harris is like, "I'm done. I'm sitting here. I'm just going to die. It's okay."
Just good.
Yeah. Instead of sleeping on a billiard table, right? And a kid with a can of beer. So I guess there's no drinking limit in England. The kid
that sounds like a trustworthy chap. The young man with a can of beer. He's like 9.
Yeah, and he says, "Hey, my mom rents a room," and they just love on. They hug this kid, and Harris. I love the line where it says, "He didn't regain consciousness until he had drained half the kid's beer." So, he drinks his kid's beer, and then they go to the place, this house. His mom lets him in, and tiny beds. Apparently, they said a 2-foot-6-inch bed, and the 2 of them, Harris and Jerome.
It's not
exactly.
A bed.
It's
not barely a couch.
Exactly. So
it's a footstool.
2-foot-6-inch bed. They had to tie themselves together with the bed sheet so they didn't fall out. And then,
are you sure 2-foot-6-inch?
That's what it said. And then George is in the kid's bed and his feet are sticking out. And I love they use his sticking out feet as their towel rack in the morning. Anyway, so that's their story of when they were in Datchet last. Well, it's time for lunch, and they're going to have some cold beef, but they've got no mustard. Now we get into this idea of, I would give anything for just a little bit of mustard right now for this cold beef. And Jerome even said, he says, "I would give worlds." He's like, "I don't know how many worlds are in the universe, but, whoever came across us with a pot of mustard right now, like, they'd be set for life." I'm like, A, you don't have the authority to give someone every world in the universe, Jerome. That's kind of presumptuous. But
certainly over mustard.
Exactly. But he's raving about how he would do anything for this mustard right now. And then he goes, "I don't even like mustard, honestly. but I just wanted some right then. I don't normally take it, and I don't really like it, but you know how it is when you really want something. And then
if you ignore a craving for 10 minutes, it's supposed to go away.
Yeah.
It does not.
It doesn't. So they get this discussion about how you would give anything when you want something, and he tells a story, which this one was very relatable to me. This story about this guy in the Swiss Alps who's hiking or whatever, and he's lost and whatnot.
I see the connection already.
Yeah, so I would give anything. I would give anything for a beer right now. And he then happens upon a beer house in the mountains, and he goes in, and they want 5 francs for a beer, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not paying 5 francs for a beer," and he storms out, and he writes the editor of the Times about how they were trying to rip him off for this.
That's you.
Beer.
That is you.
Well, this is a very relatable story.
Worded letter.
It's a very relatable story because this literally happened to me. So, years ago, before we had children, my wife and I are traipsing around the Middle East, and we are hiking up Mount Sinai in Egypt. And we got there late in the day. We drove across. So we took the ferry down from Jordan across the Red Sea, and then we drove across the Sinai Peninsula, and we didn't get to Mount Sinai until about 4 p.m. And most of the tours were done, whatnot. We were the only people there.
Yeah, someone tells me 4 p.m. is a little late to climb Mount Sinai.
A little late to start climbing Mount Sinai. But anyway, we were like, no, we're good. We're going to do it. So we start climbing, and we didn't have any, I don't think we had any food with us. So like we start climbing, and it's dark, we got light. We got this guide with us, and he's taking us up, and it's a pretty good hike up there, right? And at 2 or 3 points along the way, they do have these little comfort stations or whatever where you can buy stuff. And I mean, we were so hungry, but they wanted like $3 for a Snickers bar. I was so mad. I was like, "Oh, you guys are getting me. Fine, I'll pay $3 for a Snickers bar because we're hungry. But ooh, I'm not gonna like it." So the story was quite relatable to me. Anyway,
at least you did buy it and eat.
I did. Yeah,
didn't just stick with your
no strongly worded letter to the editor of the Times either.
Because the people on Mount Sinai would give.
They seriously care, right? So then we get into the story about the pineapple tin. They're hungry. They're like, "Oh, we all like pineapple," which again, this brings me to the scarcity. We don't appreciate the abundance and availability of food in the modern world. Like, they had a tin of pineapple, and they're like, "Oh, hey, we like pineapple, don't we? Yeah, we like." This was like a treat. This was not like we can go buy pineapple almost all year round, just about, and just have pineapple. So
I mean, here, right?
Here we can.
It's not just a modern day thing, but it's also like
American
the type
thing.
Of country you live in. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, so this pineapple tin, they're trying. They find out they don't have their can opener, and they're just beating on this tin, and they cannot get it open. They beat it flat. They beat it back into shape, and then finally they just chuck it into the river, and they're like, "Whatever, we don't need this thing." I know you have a hard out, so we're gonna pick this up a little bit. Then we talk about Maidenhead, the city, and they don't like it, so they kind of keep on trucking. And they talk about the wind, how the wind's always goes the wrong way. Well, except for the time when it's going the way they need it in this story. so they
of course
they discount the times that it does work, right? And then he talks about steering. So as we discussed earlier, so you can tow the boat or you can throw the mast up. So apparently the wind was good today, even though he just told us that the wind's always against you. And so they'd thrown up the sail, and he was excited because he was getting to steer, and it was so fun going fast down the river. And he likened it to, of course, this is written Wright brothers pre-flight. The fastest that man has ever come, the closest we've come to being able to fly, is racing down the river, and it's very exhilarating. And they crash into another boat, and George is like, "You know what, man? I'm gonna steer. You are too intellectually minded and too high and mighty. So let some of us that are not so bright, how about we steer there, Jerome?" And that closes out chapter 12.
got some good language at the end of this chapter too, similarly to the end of the other one. Like, we seemed like knights of some old legend sailing across some mystic lake into some unknown realm of twilight unto the great land of the sunset.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, he's really getting into this river journey. He's digging it. So I don't know how much the friends are reading into it, but he's certainly digging it. All right, so that closes out what we've got going on this week for our chapters. So as we say each week, if you like what we're doing, then why don't you head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review, tell some friends what you think, and get some more folks to listen and spread the word, because those nice ratings, those nice reviews, that's how other people find the show. For next time, we're going to be reading through chapter 15. So that'll be the next assignment here. And, tell us what you think of this book so far. This is, I don't remember how many books have we done? 10 or so?
Oh, a lot, I feel.
I don't know. We've done a lot of books. So if you've missed any of these books, they're all in your podcast feed, or alternatively, you can check us out on YouTube. All the books are there. You can listen to the books on YouTube. You can watch our video discussions for most of them once we started doing those. So head on over, like and subscribe over on YouTube, please. You can also follow us on social media. We are at CYSTpod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as Reddit now. And we will be broadcasting our readings live, so you can come hang out on Reddit in the Read With Me subreddit, and we'll be putting some chapters up in there. Yeah, try that out. Get some chapters, maybe get some discussion after we're done reading. Some, live excitement on online. You can also send us an email, cystpod@gmail.com, if you got questions, concerns, comments, anything. You just want to talk about these books. All right. You got anything else for this week, Mare?
I don't, but I've been ruminating in my mind about, we didn't do a spooky book for Halloween season, but we should find something small and short and little to do. Right? We're in the middle of this book, so we're not going to pick up a big novel and do a long October spooky novel, but we should find something that's short and maybe do it live on Reddit. I don't know if we could read together live on Reddit, but we should do something. Think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Spooky short story.
I think we should do that. I think that's a good idea. We'll look into that. I'm sure, and come on, there's got to be some spooky Vonnegut or something, or maybe Poe. I think Poe's obviously spooky.
That's a good idea.
Do a couple of those. I don't know what else is spooky and short. I don't know. We'll find something. So
Stephen King has short stories, I'm sure, but they're not public domain. Anyway,
we can still read them on Reddit, though. We can read them on Reddit, though. We just can't put them out later.
Profit off them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Not like we're profiting off of this, so, Anyway, yeah, so, and if you have ideas for a cool spooky book that we can do, shoot that over to us, too. All right, so it is, keeping in that spooky season, it's Spirit Week, so make sure you dress up like your favorite Nickelodeon character this Thursday.
Peace.